Hello, welcome back to Tiny Artist TV. Today's video is the last video in the Orctober series for 2020. I know I pretty much missed a few days, but this final video I decided instead of doing a long video with a prompt from every single day, I just combined them into one huge costume. And there were only a few costumes left, so it was literally 7 days worth of costumes. I did end up not including one of them, but we'll get to that once we get to the actual drawing part of the process. But the costumes that were left over were werewolf, witch, an angelic style costume, a royal style costume, a Pokemon costume, dragon, and Greek style costume. So I have combined all of those into one big costume, and I guess it turned out alright. It's a little messy, but we got it to work. Something else I did just to keep in line with the other videos that I've done is I did generate a color palette for each piece of the costume. So each costume does still have its own color palette. So we've already gotten started with the drawing. Let's go ahead and get started with the explanation of my thought process behind combining these very different costumes. So once again, kind of tying everything back into the orc lore that I've been referencing, there is a clan of, not a clan of werewolves, well, technically, a clan of orcs who turn into werewolves, and so I figured it made sense for Orctober for this character to be just that. A lot of the different costumes ended up being more just kind of accessories than actual like stylistic choices. My main focus was on this character being a werewolf, but also a witch. So she's using her magic in this very dynamic, like threatening hunter's pose, more or less. And the rest of it just kind of ended up being, again, like I said, accessories. Like the angel wings, originally I was gonna give her like a halo or something like that to kind of make it look a little broken and a little more witchy, but I figured the wings went better with the tail and also balanced out the piece as a whole a little bit better instead of making her taller, because she's already taking up most of the canvas, to kind of give her a little more weight horizontally, and again just balancing out with that tail. I kind of wish I had done the angel, or had gotten the angel one earlier, so that I could mix this with something that would have thematically worked a little bit better, but that's what happens when you use random prompt generators to generate your drawings. Of course, the clothing style, I used the Greek costume to do the clothing style. The color palette that ended up being used for the Greek, it doesn't really read as Greek, even though they did still have colors in the colors that I ended up using, but when you look at it, you don't immediately think Greek, just because it's not like your traditional white and cream robes, but it's the cut of the fabric that I was more focused on. For the witch elements, she's of course got these like flaming hands and her flaming eye, and then these magic daggers that she's got floating around her, and then of course also the markings that are going up her eyes, or up her arms and down her face. For royalty, the belt was kind of supposed to be a combination of like Greek and royal, but most of the royal elements don't come into play until I've already done most of the coloring, and then I add those in over top so that I'm not getting overwhelmed with all of these teeny tiny details, because as you can see, there's already a lot going on. I'm adding this scarf to kind of make the wings make a little more sense. This is supposed to be kind of like an angelic floating scarf, but it's also kind of witchy. I end up using the light green that comes from the angel color palette to kind of try to tie everything together, which what this scarf is literally doing is pretty much enveloping and holding this character, all of the elements together. For the dragon was just kind of a throwaway. I don't have in my mind that she's part dragon. I figure this is just some sort of like witch's familiar type spell that gives her animal parts, and so she's got this dragon tail as either like illusion magic or temporary magic, but she's not part dragon because that would just be ridiculous. I mean, some people's D&D characters do go into that realm of being like just OP for the sake of being like, ooh, different and edgy, but this is not that. She's practical. The one that I ended up leaving out, which as I'm getting into the shading of this completed character illustration, is the Pokemon. Initially, I was going to do the Pokemon as her familiar, and I was going to do Pumpkaboo, because Pumpkaboo is like, you know, it's Halloween's classic cute little pumpkin Pokemon. However, as you can see here, she is taking up all of the canvas space. So by the time I finished the line art for her, I decided, you know what? I'm not gonna squeeze a Pokemon in to everything else that's going on here. And realistically, I guess I could have done a ghost Pokemon that's kind of flying around her in the same way that the scarf is going around her. But no. And my no, as I kept working on this piece, just became more solidified. Trying to work all of these colors in. The color palette for the Pokemon was this ghostly blue one, so it would have worked, but there was already so much going on, and again, space-wise, I didn't feel like it worked, and then color palette-wise, not the best for matching because of all of these other colors that are already happening in here. So that's the other thing, is that I did mention that each piece of the costume has its own color palette. You can see my big old city grid of colors up here. The first one is for her clothing. The second one was for her royalty style jewelry and accessories. The third one is for the angel parts. The fourth color palette is for her skin tones and hair. The fifth one, it's got all the purples and blues, you can see I'm working on it now, is for the witch's fire and any witchy elements. So I also use the brown in the color palette for her claws, so it's kind of like an old patina bronzy metal claws instead of like doing them any other kind of color. And then of course the fifth one was supposed to be the Pokemon's palette, which I don't end up drawing, and then the last one is the Dragon's palette, which I really love that color palette, but I tried to do something more with the Dragon's tail and it ended up being too much. I leave it in the video so you guys can see what I'm talking about, but there is a lot going on with this character. At this point, I really love the design, minus the wings. Like, I tried to make the wings work as best as I could. Maybe I could have made them into demon wings to make her a fallen angel instead, but I also felt that it did need to be a softer element to really read as angel, because that's the costume that I was supposed to be working with. And also that way it makes more sense with this scarf that she's got going around. And now I'm adding in some more of the royal elements. It's just kind of some generically placed jewels and gold. Again, I didn't want to like just keep piling on details because this character has a lot going on. So I'm basically just trying to incorporate as much stuff as I can without making her look too like because I did pretty much just throw everything into a blender, but without it making it look like I threw everything into a blender. I wanted it to look intentional, and I tried my best not to do any colors that like weren't on the palette. So everything is actually, all of the colors are picked from the palette. In previous costumes, I would take the color palette and either take the initial color and make it lighter or darker or a little more gray or a little more black or whatever. This one I just used the color that's on the palette because there is enough for me to work with. And when you start playing with shades within the color that you're working with, yeah, I actually did play around with that a little bit, and it was too much. And I knew that I had my multiply shading already set, and so I figured that would just take care of any other lights and darks that I need, and just went from there. And here I'm starting to play around with the spots on the dragon's tail. And even though this pattern does look pretty on its own, with this character, it's way too much. I love how the expression turned out. I'm very proud of that. Like, the expression, the stance, because snarls, for some reason, I've always kind of had trouble drawing them. Maybe just because, like, the way the lips move, it's very, like, contrapposto for lips. And so, trying to get that right and make it look aggressive, I'm very pleased with how that turned out. And now we're just getting into the final touches of the drawing. Just adding, so I do add a little bit of shading to the hair. But other than that, like, that's really the only part. I didn't even really do shading on the face because the shadow from the other layer took care of that. My main thing was getting those other little highlights in there that I had earlier that I had taken back off, just so that this way I could better plan where the highlights actually should be. Alright, and here is our final drawing for Orctober. My way too much anime, edgy, DeviantArt OC over the top Halloween costume mashup. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next month for Huevember tutorials. That's right, I will be getting back into doing tutorials next month. Still randomly generating color palettes, so I don't even know what I'm going to be showing you guys. But anyway, have a weird day, and I'll see you next time.